Today I'll be discussing the tragedy of the commons and the game we played. I'd like to start off by playing a quick clip of Garrett Harding discussing the tragedy of the commons.
To explain carrying capacity, you created an analogy of the tragedy of the commons.
Yes.
Could you explain that for us?
The tragedy of the commons is concerned with the problem of allocation of resources. For religious reasons, many people want to adopt a motto like the one that Karl Marx expressed, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs. In other words, the mere fact that you exist entitles you to your share of whatever there is that's around. Now, no other species of animal operates by this principle, and to think that human beings can do so safely is a very radical idea, and biologists don't think that they can. And as a matter of fact, the experiments that have been tried among human beings have shown that it doesn't work. For example, when you have a common pasture land and anybody who wants to can pasture his cattle on it, this works as long as there aren't many people. But as soon as there are many people, meaning many animals to be pastured, it turns out that people will put too many animals on the pasture, and if they're completely free to do what they want to, and finally you have to do either one of two things. Either you divide the pasture up into many different pieces of private property, and each person's responsible for his own, or you say, we'll manage this as a group, we'll appoint a manager, we'll pay him to manage this, and he will tell us how many cattle we can put on the land, and we have to do as he says. So it's either socialism or private property. Either one of those may work, but the unmanaged commons cannot possibly work once the population gets above a certain size.
One example of the tragedy of the commons in real life is the Grand Banks fisheries. The Grand Banks are fishing grounds off the coast of Newfoundland. For centuries, explorers and fishermen thought there was endless amounts of cod there. Advances in technology in the 1960s and 70s allowed fishermen to catch as much as they wanted. What eventually happened was a dramatic decrease of fish, and the population dropped. By the 1990s, the cod populations were so low that the whole Grand Banks fishing industry collapsed. They said that it was too late for regulation and management, and that the cod stocks had been irreparably damaged. Since then, populations have remained low, and a lot of people doubt that the Grand Banks ecosystem will ever recover. I'm going to talk about the data and graph that we collected from the Fishbanks game. One thing we learned from the tragedy of the commons is that overfishing happens when competition takes place, and that's a natural part of capitalism. I think we all went into this game in a fairly ignorant fashion. Not necessarily ignorant, but we thought that this wouldn't necessarily happen to us, but it's inevitable. So as we see, year after year, the amount of ships went way up as competition raised. And since we were all competing to beat each other, we didn't realize that we were diminishing the fish population incredibly quickly. Here's our catch per ship. As we saw, or we didn't really know, but we started to realize that over time the amount of fish started to diminish. As you can see by this diagram, the amount of fish just went exponentially lower up until even the coastal found itself with zero fish. Once again, right here you can see that a lot of us started to switch towards the coastal region, but that was futile because once we sent all of our fish there, we completely diminished the population within a year. Total catch, this is just another diagram showing us how our overfishing killed the population incredibly quickly. I thought this was an interesting diagram because during the game we had no idea that the amount of fish we were killing. All we saw was the profits in our Excel data table, so it was pretty hard to say, hey, we should probably conserve. No, it was more like, let's beat the other team and make the most money. Yeah, it's just another example of us killing all the fish. I thought this was pretty interesting. I remember at the beginning of the game, we were all talking about let's buy as many ships as we have or we can get, just so we have a lot of assets, so we could sell them at the end of the game. But then, I guess one thing we didn't take into account is that all these ships will be worth nothing by the end of the game, as seen here.